So this is a Holtzapfel 12-string guitar for our first specimen today. Made in Baltimore. It's got a spruce top, mahogany sides and back, unbound back, radius fingerboard, which is kind of unusual for a guitar that was made in 1905. And it's actually got a drop-in saddle, also rather unusual. It was made by a man named Holtzapfel and his partner named Beidel. And Beidel left the company in 1905, so this has to have been made 1905 or earlier. I'll play a little bit of... very loud guitar. It's got a 0 fret, which is really great because the action is always exactly the right height. Holtzapfel kept on making these things way after this one was made, and so I'll put the 1905 guitar down, and this is another that was made just by Mr. Holtzapfel by himself with no partnership. Doesn't sound a whole lot different. Has a little different tonal coloration, but it's about the same loudness. It's got a much thicker top. The top is almost twice as thick as the one here, and yet it's just about as loud. Oh, did I mention it's got a baseball bat neck? This neck is so big that a lot of people that buy these things, if they can find one at all, they end up having it shaved down just to fit their hand, and I can see why they would do it. Luckily, it doesn't bother me.
Is that stamped Louisville Slugger?
Yes, actually, no. But it certainly would make a great baseball bat.
So the guitar that I'm going to demonstrate first is also an auditorium-sized guitar. We call them jumbos. And this one's a little bit unusual, just like the Holtzapfels are a little unusual. This one is unusual because it was made by one of the Italian makers working in New York City in the turn of the about 1900 to maybe 1920. And we refer to them as the Italian Luthiers Guild. And these guitars are unique, and they're like Stella guitars or the Oscar Schmidt instruments. And it's reported by Neil and others who have done the research that many of the Italian luthiers in Manhattan also went across the river and worked in Jersey City in the Oscar Schmidt factory. So they also went home and produced their own guitars out of their own shops, and this is one example there. Things that make them different from a typical factory-produced Oscar Schmidt 12-string jumbo. First of all, the neck is actually not a traditional dovetail neck joint. It has more of a straight-in mortise and tenon, so the sides actually come up and the neck sits down in between the ends of the sides. And other things that make it kind of unique for that type of build is you're going to see this style of purfling that is typical on a lot of the Italian Guild instruments. We've had a number of them over the years, and Neil's had a number of them. And it seems like they either bought it, by the ship load, or they were sharing it amongst themselves. Who knows? But you often see these multiple layers connected together like this. The other thing that makes them a little bit different from the Oscar Schmidt factory-produced guitars is these are really finely made instruments. You can pretty much tell that they're almost like a custom-made low-production instrument. First of all, the finish is very, very clean and smooth, and all the fittings, everything that was fit together fits very well. And there's also a fine layer here on the sides. Even when they did the the binding on the neck, you can see a very fine layer of ebony in there that kind of finished off the siding, make it very, very flashy to the eye as well. Comparing this to the factory-made Oscar Schmidt Jumbos, this one sort of maybe has a sweeter tone to it. For some reason, there aren't a whole lot out there, so it's tough to make these comparisons. But generally speaking, this example tends to have a more sweet tone when compared to like a lead belly type Oscar Schmidt Jumbo. We often call these examples the deluxe version because they have the fancy inlay they have on the fingerboard, and they have the extra purfling around the sound hole, and they're also bound on the neck and around the headstock, fancy tuners. The materials are spruce. It looks like a nice grade of red spruce, and the back and sides are mahogany. Has a nice purfling strip inlaid down the middle of the back, and interestingly, it's different from the inlay that's on the top. Has a mahogany neck. And on many of the Oscar Schmidt guitars, you'll find that the V-shaped neck. However, this is not quite the baseball bat of the Holzapfel, but this is a rounded carve that is typical of the Italian Luthiers. And it's a nice handful, but it's not a handful that is just uncomfortable to play. So it's just a very, very sweet guitar, very nice guitar. See that label on there? You saw it when I bought it. It has the like Elmer F. Bauer.
Oh my Lord!
Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
Wow.
There's a street address, and I used to drive by this Church Street in this old part of town. I used to drive by this guy's house all the time when I was working. I worked in the city school, and suddenly I realized, hey, that house right there is where this guitar was.
The very first Oscar Schmidt Stella Jumbo that I bought, I got from a guy who had an antique business in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and I drove up there to pick it up. I know the route backwards and forwards because I go to the car shows up
Oh,
there.
yeah, that's right.
And this thing had been, we'll call it a neck set, but it was, what happened is he put an eye bolt here and an eye bolt down here, and had a cable,
strap.
a cable going from here to
exactly
here.
what this thing had. It's exactly how this was set up, but it was a metal strap that actually went up.
This was a cable,
cable.
with a turnbuckle in the middle to tighten it up to get it to the right.
The neck, it's exactly how this was set up. That's what held it together.
Maybe the same person did it.
Yeah. We're going to talk now about the factory-produced Stella guitars, the Stella 12 strings in Jersey City from just before 1900 up through maybe the mid-30s. There was a Oscar Schmidt factory in Jersey City, and they produced guitars by the boatload, thousands and thousands of guitars. It was a major factory. Produced mostly smaller guitars, concert size, a few grand auditorium, which is a little bigger, and then they produced these. And we refer to these as jumbos. They were listed in their catalogs as auditoriums. And what makes them the auditorium or the jumbo is a couple of things. Number one, the huge body. And we're pushing almost 16 inches wide, probably 15 and a half. And then you have the long scale length. This particular example right here measures 26 and a half, just a hair over 26 and a half inches in length. So it's got the big scale. You can put big strings on it, get the big sound, the big tone. And a lot of people refer to this particular model as the lead belly model. And I know some folks learned from Neil's book on Stella guitars that Lead Belly actually ordered his guitar in the 30s, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. But it looks exactly like this. It had the nice 12 strings with the tailpiece with the studs. and it had the fancy purfling around the sound hole on the sides, the binding, and so on. It's not quite the deluxe version with the fancier inlay and the bound neck, but it's the plain Jane with the high quality inlay and the tailpiece. So this is the Stella Jumbo Auditorium guitar. With these guitars, people play around with them. If you have a couple of them, you have the opportunity to put different string gauges on them. And on this particular model, I have heavier strings, so these might be like 12 or 13s, and the bass here, that might be like a 54 or maybe a 56. And when you do that, you can turn way down. I think this one's probably tuned to a B, so you get that big rumble, and it's good for a lot of lead belly things and some of the blind Willie McTell pieces. Where you need to adjust your voice to a lower pitch. So this is the lead belly version of the Oscar Schmidt 12-string Auditorium. And Neil's going to talk about a Deluxe Jumbo.
Yeah, basically the same size, same woods, but it's got more fancy purfling around the whole back, and it also has a just absolutely stunningly comfortable neck. It's just a piece of artwork. This one has a pin bridge instead of the tailpiece, which gives it a different sound quality, and it's got the fancy inlays. Some people like to call those Nick Lucas inlays only because Nick Lucas Gibson guitars had similar inlays. Actually, Nick Lucas was partial to those kinds of inlays because he played a Galliano before he went with the Gibson company. But this thing has a absolutely remarkable sound. You can feel it rumble against your chest.
So what we're looking at now, we're probably ratcheting up in the Oscar Schmidt history maybe a decade or two. And what began to happen, of course, the Depression came along and they need to make cheaper guitars. So when we looked at the Deluxe and the Jumbo, the two Auditorium 12 strings, we saw nicely finished off guitars with fancy inlays. We had nice spruce tops, mahogany backs, mahogany necks. But once you're into this Depression era, times were tough. And Schmidt responded by making guitars similar to this one. We call this one the Gambler Deluxe. Call it the Gambler because it's obvious it has decks of cards, decals on it. And it also has the Deluxe nomenclature because it has all the, what we refer to as mother toilet seat plastic fingerboard and headstock overlay. And it has the embossed Stella on the headstock, which makes it an official Stella. I would guess this one was probably made maybe somewhere between 25 and the early 30s. The reason I would say that is because the headstock shape still relates back to the earlier headstock shapes. They did alter the shapes at some point in the 30s to make a narrower headstock. And some of the bracing is still like the older bracing. And the Decalcomania part is interesting. I always thought like Beatlemania, whatever, they invented decals and suddenly there was Decalmania, but it actually is Decalcomania, and it refers to an art movement that happened back at that time period in the early 20th century. So I guess there was decoupage or something going on, but the Oscar Schmidt catalogs of the period, and Neil has a number of them actually reproduced, they actually do describe these as Decalcomania guitars. So you'll find these fancy decals like this, you'll find the decals like this, you'll find all kinds of other classical type things and flowers and so on. So the Decalcomania is an example of Decalcomania. Play a little bit on this. Construction-wise, pretty similar construction. Now this is what we call a grand concert size, so it's about 14 3/4 inches across the lower bout, but it still shares the same long scale, probably about 26.5 inches as the Auditorium or Jumbo size. But the materials changed to reflect that Depression era as well. So now you're not seeing the spruce top, you see a birch top, a slab sawn birch sides, birch back, and the necks on these are often a real softwood, and oftentimes poplar, basswood are mentioned. I'm not 100% sure what they were, but they were made cheaply, but made to look glitzy. And this is the Gambler Deluxe.
Just a few years later, the Oscar Schmidt Company had gone out of business. They managed to get through most of the Depression, but they ended up having to sell their Stella name and the Sovereign name brands to the Harmony Company. And this is their version of a Stella 12-string that was made in 1951. And if you'll notice, it's got a very rounded shape. It's made out of birch. Baseball bat neck, much different from the Oscar Schmidt neck. This body shape was only used for a few years, and they changed the body shape to the shape of, if you can see it behind me, over here in the corner. But they kept on using this same picture taken probably shortly after World War II in their catalogs all the way up through 1964. Has a good sound. But it's nothing like the Oscar Schmidt. Funky, but doesn't have the.
What's the scale
punch.
length on that?
It's got a 25-inch scale, but it doesn't produce that volume that the Oscar Schmidt guitars are notorious for. Still a lot of fun to play.
I never saw one like that.
You probably won't see one because I've been looking for 20 years and finally this one came around.
So it's pretty rare
Yeah,
guitar.
they made a lot of 6-string guitars with this body shape, but the 12-string guitars, very shortly after this was made, they changed the body shape. And actually, the new body shape sounds better. Sounds better than the earlier one. Same baseball bat neck, but
Has a little bigger tone to it.
yeah, it has a bigger
A little more
sound.
oomph.
A lot of fun, very funky sound.
And affordable.
Yes.
When you're talking about the jumbo 12 strings from the teens, 20s, and 30s and the Holtzoffels, it's a whole different story.
Yeah, they're not cheap.
And these are this version is fairly common guitar.
Yeah, and they changed it just slightly to this is the 922. These are both model 922s. They went to the 912 model, exactly like this, only with a white pick guard and an adjustable truss rod and a neck that's actually not like a baseball bat at all. And those are real common. And they were made under Silvertone name, Harmony name, Barclay name. I mean,
Barclay,
you can
yeah.
see a lot of those on eBay, for example, going for just a few $100.
That's right.
This one has that fatter neck, and all the 922s do, and they just have a little bit more sustain than the 912s.
I know the 912s are jangly too. They
Yeah.
have a much more jangly tone to
They
them.
do. I don't know what they did. I think that they may have changed the bracing a little bit and beefed it up a little bit
Thicker.
with the 912.
But the advantage you get with the 912 is you have the truss rod, and you can do a neck set on these. They come apart really easily. Sometimes they come apart when you don't want them to come apart.
Well, that's true.
But they're easy to work on, and when you get that neck off and get it back on at the right angle, you can adjust the flatness of the neck, the relief of the neck to get a nice player.
And incidentally, they do have a flat fingerboard, just like
Yes.
the old Oscar Schmidts, and unlike
Yeah.
the Holtzappels, which have a radius fingerboard.
Which really makes it nice for slide, too.
Yeah, it does. Well, if you're into Blind Willie McTell, you'll be wanting to do a lot of that.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the 922 made in 1963, I believe. In 1964, Harmony came out with their deluxe 12-string guitar, the model 1270, like this one. Spruce top, solid wood, mahogany sides and back. Nicely shaped neck. It's not a baseball bat. Truss rod. And a really, really amazingly good sounding guitar. It really almost competes with a Holtzappel. I'll take it.
It has a more pure tone than the all birch model, that's for sure.
Oh yeah, well this is like your coffee house king's guitar. As a matter of fact, I had one when I was in high school, and I thought I was a coffee house king with that Harmony 12-string.
So, Neil, do you want to talk about these Gibson 12 strings?
Well, yeah, actually, the Gibson company was the first company to make a 12-string for the great folk scare of the 1960s. Gibson was the first company after Harmony quit making their 922 model in 1958 or 59. So Gibson comes out in 1961 with this guy, and followed 1 year later with this one, which differs only in the fact that it's got a pin bridge instead of a tailpiece.
All mahogany construction, the sides, back, with a spruce top. And it looks like the earliest version here has a much thinner, a much narrower bridge.
Yeah.
Looks like a piece of Brazilian rosewood with a nice long tailpiece. Radius fingerboard. It's actually a kind of a narrow neck. It's a thin neck, and it's not a wide neck either compared to some of the Harmonies and some of the other guitars. I find the tone of them, they're decent, they're big, they sound nice, they're easy to play. They sound a little bit thin to me. But maybe I don't know how to play it.
One of the things that makes them sound so much different too is that every guitar we've talked about so far has been ladder braced, and these are X braced, which is what most people consider normal bracing on guitars for steel strings. And these do have a thin sound, but they sound great if you use finger picks, which I don't use, and you can really dig into these guitars. But I'm playing with my bare fingers, and you just can't get the same sound you can get out of a ladder-braced guitar.
They do ring too. They really you know, they don't decay. The sound doesn't decay.
When I was in high school, there was one of these in our local music store in Annapolis, and it cost so much money. I thought, well, I'll never, ever, ever be able to own one.
Yeah.
But I'd go by there and just look at it, look through the window at this thing, and I thought, oh God, this is what I need, because you couldn't buy a 12-string. The only 12-string guitars that I'd ever seen in person were Holtzaffels, because there were a few of those around.
In Baltimore, yeah.
Yeah. And you had to find an old one back in, like, this is, we're talking 1960 and 61. I was in junior high school, and you just couldn't buy it. I was just really getting into lead belly at that time, and I wanted a 12-string guitar, but I couldn't find them.
Yeah. But there were popular records of the day then. By the mid-'60s, you know, the Walk Right In, Step Right Down. Yeah, they had you could hear, even to an untrained ear from a 15-year-old kid, you could hear that 12-string thump.
Yeah.
You could just hear it. You know.
Probably sound even better if it was in tune.
I'll take credit for that.
Well, these are cool guitars, though. I'm very partial to Gibsons.
Yeah.
So I'm glad we included these in our little...
They're definitely part of the story there. It was a nice timeline from about 1900 up to about 62.
Yep.